So basically this movie's telling us that Rafiki planned everything? Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Disney's 2004 direct-to-video animated prequel, sequel, alternate retelling, The Lion King 1.5. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, ranked lists, and trailer reactions. All of my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. The Lion King 1.5 stars the vocal talents of Nathan Lane, Ernie Sabella, and Matthew Broderick, and was directed by Bradley Raymond. It focuses on Timon and Pumbaa, telling their origin story as well as their off-screen adventures during the events of The Lion King. The Lion King 1.5 is an extremely odd, yet somehow fitting addition to the Lion King franchise. Much like its sequel predecessor, it gives us another dose of some of the characters we loved from the original film, but rather than attempting to provide a continuation of the story or heartfelt themes, it gives us humor. This is where that odd yet fitting quality comes into play. The original Lion King was largely a grand affair. It had this majestic quality to its story and was truly moving. So it might seem a little absurd to take this almost entirely comedic route, until you think about Timon and Pumbaa. Even in the original, they were primarily comic relief, so their brand of irreverent humor not only makes sense for this movie, but also isn't entirely off base from the original film either. When this movie was released, I was perhaps a bit outside of the target age demographic, but given my love for The Lion King, I certainly watched it quite a few times. It was my least favorite and least watched of the trilogy, but that's not to say I didn't enjoy it back then. At the time, I was focused more on the story than the style, and that story just never quite intrigued me as much as I think it could have, had it been handled in a slightly more serious style. I'm not entirely sure why, but out of all the Lion King questions I had as a kid, the origin of Timon and Pumbaa was never one of them. I was always satisfied that they were just Timon and Pumbaa, and so I was simply never particularly curious about how they came to be in the jungle paradise. I think it's because, for me, the Lion King has always been synonymous with Simba. He was the character I loved and connected with, so my focus was always on him. Don't get me wrong, I always thought Timon and Pumbaa were an interesting and funny pair of supporting characters, but they were never interesting enough to me to carry their own film. From a story perspective, this film is definitely a little lackluster. There's some intended character development for Timon written in, but it does feel a little tacked on. But The Lion King 1.5 is far less about its story than it is about how it tells that story, and how it goes about doing that is pretty unique. The film's this weird blend of prequel and alternate perspective retelling. The whole movie's framed by this meta storytelling device where Timon and Pumbaa are watching the same movie we're watching, literally in a movie theater, with frequent fourth wall breaks and commentary. It's a little silly and gimmicky, but it actually works. Their commentary provides a little extra insight into some scenes, and there's even an enjoyable nostalgic throwback to the Lion King sing-along VHS. Even beyond the framing device, most of the film is this meta-referential twist on the original Lion King. We get most of the basic story points again, but this time shown from Timon and Pumbaa's perspective. Like any good retconned story, we find out that not only were Timon and Pumbaa present just off screen for nearly every iconic Lion King moment, but they frequently had a hand in the instigation or outcome of those moments. Many are just sorta eye-rollingly silly, but there were a few moments of situational humor and so that's why moments that are pretty entertaining. There are also a lot of subvertingly humorous plays on some iconic lines of dialogue from the first movie that work pretty well. And as a big Simba fan, I can't help but enjoy the extra interim jungle moments we see of him, including a very entertaining first night in the jungle sequence and a few moments from his teenage years. The Lion King 1.5 can't come close to the emotional significance of the original film, and it doesn't contribute to the continuation of the story like The Lion King 2 does, but it's still a surprisingly enjoyable watch for a Lion King fan. It's got a unique premise and fun style that provides a few chuckles and some largely unnecessary insight into this odd pair of side characters. And all the references, puns, and self-aware meta-humor and fourth wall breaks imbue this movie with a degree of cleverness I never fully appreciated when I was younger. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is definitely the premise and its execution. It was certainly a weird choice, but this movie not only provides us with some more background on Timon and Pumbaa, but it also humorously reveals their various off-screen activities during the events of The Lion King. It's all very silly, but it was a unique concept, and the level of meta-humor and self-awareness combined with Timon and Pumbaa's comedy style really makes it all work. Add in a corny, clever framing device, some good puns, and a few self-parody moments, and you've got an entertaining basis for a film. Pro number two is the voice cast. Disney's direct-to-video releases of the 90s and 2000s were notorious for swapping out vocal talents when actors would decline to return to a franchise, but amazingly, that's not something the Lion King franchise ever ran into, with either The Lion King 2 or The Lion King 1.5. All the big characters have their voices here. Nathan Lane and Ernie Sabella once again reprised their roles as Timon and Pumbaa, which is certainly a big plus considering they're the main characters this time around. But others return as well, including Matthew Broderick, Robert Guillaume, Moira Kelly, Whoopi Goldberg, Cheech Marin, and Jim Cummings. On the con side, this film's biggest issue is how inconsequential it is. I'm sure some people wouldn't consider this a con because the movie does achieve what it's intended to do. It's a silly, fluffy, nostalgic look back on The Lion King, and that's fun and all, but it's not exactly what I personally look for in The Lion King. I want the impact. I want the themes. I want that fantastic balance of story, character, and tone. And that's just not what The Lion King 1.5 is. My second con is the story focus. Again, this is more of a personal preference, but I've never found Timon and Pumbaa to be particularly interesting characters. Funny, yes, but interesting? Not really. If it weren't for the clever premise and style, I really don't think these two could have carried their own movie. They were the obvious choice to use as the central characters of an alternate perspective comedy film like this, but I would have preferred a movie from another character's perspective. Maybe Nala's story, or Rafiki's. I would have even been interested in a true prequel that got into Mufasa and Scar's time as cubs. I'm gonna give The Lion King 1.5 3 out of 5 paws. I almost went with 2.5 paws because this is a very throwaway kind of story, but I actually had a really good time with it. Way better than I anticipated. It's a unique premise, it's occasionally funny, and it's Lion King. I would recommend The Lion King 1.5 to fans of The Lion King who don't mind a little lighthearted self-parody. I think some fans could be frustrated by the frequently irreverent treatment that events of the original movie get here, but if you're open to a little tongue-in-cheek humor and silliness, I think you'll have a fun nostalgic time looking back on the Lion King moments from another perspective. If you liked The Lion King 1.5, the obvious recommendation would be the original Lion King. Not only is this a sequel featuring many characters from that film, but it also uses the film's plot as a basis for an alternate perspective retelling of the same story. If you liked the meta humor and fourth wall breaks, make sure you check out The Emperor's New Groove for a lot more of that style of comedy. And if the idea of a character being aware that they're on screen is something you enjoyed, I'd recommend Bolt. It's a different style and doesn't incorporate fourth wall breaks, but there's an inherently meta aspect built right into the plot. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen The Lion King 1.5? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what Lion King character would you most like to see a perspective or origin story for? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.